welcome to my tent, a place to hear life experiences, different opinions, a range of journeys, and a viewpoint different than our own. A place to challenge our own thoughts, a space to learn a little bit, and I promise some fun along the way. I believe we're better when we let a range of people into our tents, so welcome to mine. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Welcome to My Tent podcast. I have a very exciting guest on today, Lucy Sutton, who I know from the Chicago fitness scene, but is going to be talking to us today a little bit about her career, her job path, how that all balances out with motherhood. She lives in the suburbs of Chicago now with her husband, her son, and her soon-to-be daughter coming up in a few months. So that's really exciting. And she's going to give us a little bit of insight today about career, motherhood, balancing things, and just a real honest take on some of the stuff that she's learned along the way. So Lucy, welcome. If you want to give a quick, just hello, a brief intro of who you are, that would be awesome.
Yeah. I mean, thank you so much for having me. I feel like that kind of sums me up. I feel like all I do these days is like work and mother. Outside of that, I think I told you this before we connected today that I'm outside of being a mom and a career person. I'm also a wife and a sister. I have 4 sisters and the youngest of 5 girls. And so that's like a huge piece of my identity. But then there's obviously friendships and, in-law relationships. And so I feel like I think of myself, I define myself sort of by like the relationships that I have.
Yeah.
And I think that's mostly because I think that relationships are like the most important thing in life. I think it's like what life is all about. So yeah, when I give my intro, I'm like, who am I to everyone else? I'm a career person. I'm a mom. I'm a sister, all those things.
I always get tripped up too. And my answer sometimes is like, I'm a person. Like, yeah. I don't even know what
I do stuff.
Say, especially as things become so intricate. And we'll definitely get into this because something I would love your POV on today as well is as we get older, things get so much more complex and I feel like we're constantly adding things. If you could give us a little bit of your background, how you went from corporate, you're a marketer by trade, but you went from corporate to working for yourself. So if you could, and that was a pretty recent change, if you could go walk us through sort of the thought path into making that transition and some of the whys and how that looked for you, whether it was a decision you'd wanted to make for a long time or you did it sort of on a whim. I'd love to hear the progression from going corporate to working for yourself.
I'll give you the logistical piece of it first, like how we got here, and then I'll kind of tell you my why. So I had moved to San Francisco for a job. My husband had not gotten a job yet. And so we moved kind of with this, like, everything was riding on me a little bit. We moved all the way across the country. We had just gotten married, by the way, like 2 months prior. So we moved across the country to the most expensive city in the country for a job. I'm at that job for 6 months. Somewhere in that 6 months, my husband so he stayed in Chicago actually and was like commuting every weekend to come visit me for 3 months.
Oh my gosh.
Decided he couldn't do that anymore. So decided to leave his job in Chicago without another job in SF and come. So we're both living at SF. He's unemployed. I walk into work on a Tuesday, this job that I moved across the country for, and I was laid off.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. What am I doing? I remember walking home that day from being laid off, like just sobbing and like, we literally live in the most expensive city in the country with 0 income. This is terrifying. That piece like kind of plays into it because it gave me this newfound appreciation for having a little bit more control over my career. So that kind of was like the spark to it. Cried for an hour and went through the self-pity spiral for an hour. And then I was like, okay, like time to buck up. Let's fix this. So I started bombing out my resume. Long story short, within 2 weeks, I had a new job. I'm sitting at my new job. I'm there for 3 months and I like absolutely despise it. Like it was just terrible. I took it because I needed a job and it was not great. And so I kind of was like, what am I doing with my life? Like, I feel like I just keep bopping around to these huge companies. They're never really solving for what I'm looking for. my dad was self-employed. He like always said, you never work a day in your life if you love what you do.
You're like, well, I hate this. So
yeah. And I always like laughed at that, but I get it now. And so I was kind of like, I just need a passion project on the side. And I have been an equestrian my whole life. I rode growing up and competing. And so I was like, I'm going to start consulting for small businesses in the equestrian industry. And I have to give a shout out to two of my sisters, Heidi and Emily, who started their own consulting businesses before me and inspired me and made me feel like anything was possible. So I took inspiration from them and decided to start consulting for small businesses in the equestrian industry on the side of my full-time job that I hated. I'm like, this is going to be my bright spot in the day. Like, yeah, it's fine. That was in February of 2020. March of 2020, the world shuts down. So it was just like this weird, I don't know, like timing spiral. As that's all happening, the job that I moved out to San Francisco for that laid me off came back to me and said, oops, no, we didn't mean to let you off. Can you come back? So on my own terms, I did end up going back to that company. So I kept my clients on the side and I was working this job fully remote. In that time, Tim and I decided like we wanted to start a family. We wanted to move back to Chicago. San Francisco was just not long-term for us. So we moved back. I knew I wasn't going to be able to keep my job when I did that. So I'm like pregnant, deciding what the heck I'm going to do with my life. And I'm like, well, I don't know why I'm fighting this. Like, I'm just going to go full time on the consulting gig and like, I'll control my clients. I'll control everything. I'll have all this flexibility. It's going to be magical. So that's what I decided to do. And so shortly after deciding that, this is like, as I'm having my baby, one of my clients asked me to come on full time. So I'm like, okay, here I go back full time, but it was a small business. So I was like, whatever, this is cool. I'll spare you like all the annoying details, but I am now back to full-time consulting. And it feels great. I think that the why behind my original, I need to do this on the side to figure it out, really stems from my own mom. As I mentioned, I'm the youngest of 5, and
bless your parents. That's a lot. Oh my
gosh. Oh my gosh. Yeah. My mom is like a special kind of human. Like she's just phenomenal. So is my dad, but my mom liked to raise 5 kids as a stay-at-home mom, which is what I was going to say. She was a stay-at-home mom. And I always kind of thought I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom until I started my career. And then I was like, oh, wait, this is important to me too. This kind of felt like a way that I could have both. And I had seen my one sister, Heidi, do this. She has 2 beautiful daughters and was doing this, while her kids were little. And from the outside, it looked amazing. So
are you like, Heidi, why didn't you tell me?
Well, I think maybe in hindsight, she did tell me, I just didn't believe her. Or before you become a mom, you just don't know.
Yeah.
You don't even know what that means, what is flexibility and what is balance until you become a mom.
Yeah.
So yeah, my why was really my mom and my sister being there for their kids. They just, I think both of them, I admire them so much because they show up. My mom still to this day shows up, but when I was a kid and I was sick and the school nurse called home, my mom was there. She dropped what she was doing and she was there. And that at the time I probably didn't appreciate enough, but now I'm those are the things that matter.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a long-winded way of getting there, but
no, we love it. We love it. We love it. And I think, like you said, COVID put a weird time warp into the mix. And I think a lot of people, I don't know, careers at that point were very confusing. And I mean, yeah, very much so. But that sort of put a wrench in it. And I love that you started off with a niche first, equestrian and riding, and finding that corner of the universe. You love it. You felt comfortable there, and building it out from there. And I love that you're so close to your family and draw inspiration from them as well. And you mentioned within your little pre-bio that growing up as the youngest, especially, you sometimes would feel kind of the youngest child syndrome. Now you actually really embrace that side of the relationships that you have and the people that you draw in. And it's awesome to hear that your sisters and your mom have been such a big positive influence on you. And I'd love to talk a little bit about the flexibility piece, because that's a big reason as to why you wanted to start this. But as a working parent, you're constantly trying to do both things. So do you feel like, since you do work for yourself, that's actually a little bit tougher? Because for me, corporately, I'm like 9 to 5 is my job. I'm sort of set by that. But when you make your own hours and you make your own schedule, is that actually harder sometimes?
I mean, well, the piece about like being my own boss and not answering to anyone, it's like, that's only in theory, because really I answer to my clients.
True.
So I actually have multiple bosses in my clients, which they're amazing. So it's wonderful. I don't know that I would say it's harder. I think everything is hard. It's just, I talk about this all the time that like, I mean, I'm not that old. I'm almost 30. So, there's that. But like, I feel like in my life, motherhood is the phase of life where I've experienced more than ever before this idea that like every single micro to macro decision is a trade-off and a compromise. Mm-hmm. And like, it always feels so high stakes. Like every single decision feels like a really big one. Example, do I give my kid this Lara bar because he like hasn't eaten anything all day and he's just being a stubborn toddler and like won't eat anything? Do I give him this Lara bar, or do I try to force feed him this like broccoli fritter that I handmade for him? And it's like, well, what's more important to me, him starving or him eating something that's like crazy nutritious and like homemade and that makes me feel like I'm some super mom because I made it for him? Like, yeah. And really, the answer is like, A, it actually doesn't matter. But B, it feels so high stakes and it feels like every choice, there's never like the perfect thing. So you're always compromising on something. Yeah. I don't know that it's harder. I think it's hard in a different way. Mm-hmm. I actually think that like, I'll give you like some insight into my marriage maybe on this one, but like, I actually think that the biggest challenges with the flexibility piece comes in like the relationship that I have with my husband.
Interesting.
Like, I think ultimately I probably end up doing generally the same things for my son that I would do if I was in a corporate job. But the difference is like my husband works in finance and he has kind of intense hours sometimes. And it feels like because I'm the one with the most flexibility, I become that like default parent. I actually don't resent it day to day. There are times where I'm really exhausted and burnt out, and I do resent it a lot. But I think like generally speaking, I like being there and I like being that one. But it definitely like creates imbalances in the marriage. My son, he goes to, one of the amazing parts about my flexibility is that he goes to a Montessori school. Mm-hmm. And so it's a school. So the hours are 9 to 3:45. If I was in a corporate job, that would not work because I don't get home until 9:15 and I have to leave at 3:30 to pick him up. And so like, that's one of the amazing things, but it's a school. So they take spring break. So last week he was off. And it was like never even a discussion between my husband and I who would be handling him during the week. That's totally fine. But it's like, then that means that I'm working early morning, late night, and during nap. And so I feel like I'm letting my clients down because I have to say no to meetings during his awake times. The flexibility sometimes feels like a little bit of a curse.
Yeah.
Concept of flexibility actually has more of an impact on my marriage and that relationship than it does on like the relationship with my son.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I'm sure you're not the only one that feels like this. And I even sometimes feel like from the second I open my eyes to the second that I go to sleep, my day is just jam-packed. And my husband similarly is in finance and works also with other countries. And so he'll have calls at 6 a.m. And I know it's not his fault. If he could be there, he would. But it can feel really easy to get burnt out. And I feel like you're so passionate about your family, but you're also really passionate about your work. And it can feel disappointing. You want to show up 100% for both, but there's just no logical way to. And this is when I get when people say, I wish there was more than 24 hours in a day. When you're going through these things and you're like, okay, yes, I have the flexibility, but the flexibility can be a catch-22. How do you maybe approach those days that are a little bit more challenging?
A lot of deep breathing.
I might cry.
Oh yeah, I definitely cry like more than I ever have in any other phase of life. I also like I always when my son is having tantrums because he's in like prime tantrum toddler mode.
You're
like,
pregnant too, so you're probably like, oh.
it's an adventure. But I'm like, take a deep breath. And it's like me telling him, but I'm actually reminding myself, like, Lucy, take a freaking breath. Like, do not explode on your kid right now. So yeah, lots of deep breathing. I'm not joking. It's that idea of trade-off. Like, if I do this, that means I'm not doing that. In this exact moment, which one of those things is more important to me? I think back to like where I started this whole thing about like relationships is like that's the other piece of this. I like I feel like I've gone through therapy in multiple different phases of my life, but I would say maybe like a year ago I started seeing someone again. I remember talking to her about this. It makes me feel so good to show up for the people in my life. Like I get so much out of that. There are times where I'm choosing between someone else and like myself or my family. But actually, at the end of the day, like me choosing someone else sometimes actually does like fill my cup enough that it feels like I'm doing something for me also.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I think that when I'm in those days where it's like really, really hard, I have to find a way to like get myself out of the funk. A lot of times that will translate to hopefully I can like do something for someone else, but it also translates to like nurturing a relationship. So maybe it's I have to take the dog out. He needs to pee. In that 5 minutes, I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to call my sister-in-law who has a newborn. Or like I'm going to call my sister who lives in California who like is going through a lot in her life, period. Showing up for someone else, letting them know that I'm thinking of them. Like it reminds me of the Friends episode where it's like there's no unselfish good deed.
Oh yeah.
Phoebe and Joey like battle about this. Kind of true. I'm like, okay, so I'm actually being really selfish when I do this. Like, it makes me feel good, but it like makes me feel good because it makes someone else feel good.
Yeah.
So honestly, like on the really hard days, I feel like that's it. I have to find something that fills my cup because otherwise it just like feels like checking something off of a to-do list is actually just draining me. Like this is like just another thing I have to trudge through versus like doing something that sort of checks a box, but also actually gives me something back in my day.
That makes sense. And it seems like you draw like positivity and energy from other people, which is like extrovert, kind of qualities. And if I could ask, because you mentioned like this sometimes takes a toll on your relationship, like including your marriage.
Yeah.
Is that kind of a constant conversation that you're having in your house? Because sometimes I'm moving so fast and I feel like you're also a very busy person and professional that I forget to ask for what I need. And then I end up like resenting my husband. And he's like, you never once told me you needed help with that. So what does that look like on your end? Is that just constant conversations with your husband? Because also men, like we love them, but call a spade a spade. They don't have a mom brain and they don't know sometimes things until they're told. So with this being something that does impact your marriage, how do you guys work through that on your end and try to figure out ways to make sure both of you are staying sane?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know that I have like the answer to this. I don't know that I figured it out yet.
I don't think anyone has.
Yeah, I feel like this might be something that you kind of sit with forever with your partner. But like recently, I think it was last week actually, like I got in bed at night and I just like started to cry. And my husband was like, what's wrong? And I'm like, as I mentioned, my son's like going through some stuff.
Big feelings.
I just feel like so frustrated that I can't do right by him. Like I feel frustrated that I like don't have the energy to like show up for him in the way that I want to show up for him. And so my husband's first question to me was like, well, like, what do you need from me? What can I take off your plate so that you feel like you have the energy to give that to him? I just like started to cry harder. For me, it's really hard to ask for help because I live in this part of the mom guilt group, which I think there's like lots of different groups within the mom guilt. But I live in this part where I'm like, I should be able to do all of this. I don't know why I think that. I literally don't know anyone who can do all of it. But like, I think I should be able to. Maybe it's an arrogance thing. I don't know. Maybe I need to self-reflect on this.
No. I think it's like also society's expectation that moms should be able to do it all. Like it's always like your mom is your superhero. Mom is this like incredible being. And I think it puts a lot of pressure on us. And that does make it sometimes I feel like hard to ask for help. And, you also grew up with your mom being a pivotal person in your life. And when we're little, I don't think that we understand what's probably going through their brains and what they're trying to manage and balance. And I think that's where a lot of us find ourselves in like, why can't I do this? Why don't I feel good enough for my son? Or if there's a day that you're like choosing something for your son over your career, okay, then why aren't I good enough for my career? Anyone that you ask, I feel like that's a parent is in this boat, but I don't know. I personally sometimes feel like I'm scared to admit it because I don't want someone to think that I'm not a good mom or something. You're not alone in those feelings. I mean, I talk to a lot of my friends who feel like why can't I seem to get all this shit in a day done?
It's funny, like as we're talking through this, I'm kind of like putting all of this together for myself too, that me saying I feel like I should be able to do it all. That literally is why I decided to like change my career path, because I'm like, oh, well, I can't do this if someone else is controlling my career. But if I control my career, I can still have a kick-ass career and be a stellar mom and be head of the PTA and. Like I put that on myself. Like I said, I should be able to do this all. And I can do this all by myself without any help. And so I like set out to do it. And here I am. And it's like, why? Like, why did I think that I had more than 24 hours in a day?
Yeah. We're the exception. We're the exception to the rule. No, I feel you. And it's great that you've been having these conversations too with your husband. And sometimes even that, my husband will ask a similar thing. I'm like, I don't even know what you can do.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm literally asking you, what can I do? And I'm like, I don't know.
Well, and like same. And sometimes like I have vocalized this and like, I don't know if you feel this way, but I've said sometimes me having to ask you to do something is actually just like another thing I have to do. Like, It's like, oh, so now I not only have my massive to-do list, but I now have to sit down and look at that massive to-do list and like delegate to you. That just feels like another task on my list. That puts me into the trap of like, I just want you to know what to do, which is like so passive aggressive and like unfair. We're working on that. I'm working on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it does tend to end up that way where I'm like, I don't want to have to ask. Like, I don't want to have to remind you about X, Y, Z. Also, I should just like caveat that like my husband is phenomenal and he's a super dad and wonderful and like helps with the dishes and laundry and like blah, blah, blah. He's wonderful. It's just, typical marriage stuff.
It's hard. And you said something along the lines of this earlier. It's always going to be an evolving conversation because like you get married and whether or not you live with your partner or whatever before, like I personally did, but it's like you move in with someone and you're like, whoa, we have to figure out all of these things now. Like this is a conversation because we've moved in together and this is confusing. And then you get married and then you're traveling or doing holidays. You're figuring that out. And then you have a kid. And then you have another kid, and it's always going to be that evolving conversation. But something I was having a conversation with someone about the other day that was really interesting. And they were like, everyone keeps asking me like, oh my gosh, didn't you fall 10 times more in love with your partner when you had a baby? And they're like, no. Like, I love him. He's like you said, an incredible father, involved, like an incredible person, but this is hard, and figuring out this new set of things is difficult. Of course, watching him with our baby girl is beautiful and I love it, but it comes with a lot of challenge too. But that's the rhetoric. Oh my gosh, you're glowing. Aren't you just so in love? Aren't you 10 times more in love with your partner? Like, yeah, I love him, but we also are really trying to find our footing. Cause I mean, your son is still young. Like, it's not like you've been at this for a long time. Like, do you feel sort of similarly? And like, yeah, of course I love my husband, but like we've had some challenging conversations and this is a whole new set of circumstances that we're trying to figure out.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. I was just talking to my sister-in-law about this the other day too, that like, I feel like when you go through that transition of becoming a mom, you like assume two new roles. You assume this new role of being a mom, but you also assume this new role of like co-parent.
Yeah.
And like, so your marriage relationship or spousal relationship, whether you're married or not, is no longer just like between the two of you. There's that piece of it. Like that's one separate relationship. And then there's a relationship between like the two of you as it relates to like your responsibilities as a parent. That I think that was something that like navigating return to work after maternity leave coupled with, oh, we have two ways of being with each other now. I think it's also like why a lot of people like lives change.
Oh, yeah.
Like your partner is no longer just your partner. He's your co-parent. In some ways, that's like the most incredible thing. And you see this like whole new side of them. Just like you're expanded as a mom and like you're stretched and you've like found this new part of yourself. So have they. And you get to witness that in them. It's really hard to decouple those relationships sometimes. That's been like a very interesting thing for us to work through over the last, like, whatever, it's 18, my son's 18 months. But yeah, like it's just you assume a lot more different roles, I think, than like just, oh, you become a parent.
Yeah, that's actually a great way to put it, because also when they're super young and need basically you to do everything for them, at least on our end, it's very easy for us to be like on the track of we live our life around his needs and his life. And it doesn't sometimes leave a lot of space for you to be back in that original, this was us before baby. And like you said, like it can throw a lot of wrenches in the game and a lot of different aspects of your marriage. But even like spending time together at the end of the day, I'll crawl into bed at 7:30 sometimes when my son goes to bed, and my husband's like, well, don't you want to watch a TV show? I can't keep my eyes open. Like it does take a toll. And that's also something that I've talked to my mom about, because she's like, and then when you're an empty nester, then you're almost back with your partner as just you.
I still like you after 20 years.
I know, like, should we reopen this conversation in 21 years? But she's like, that's another involving process, and that's going to be, and then you're finding your way back to each other, and you're like, so what do we do now? Like, what's up? Like, so that's what's interesting, and you'll add to that when your baby girl comes of like, okay, now we have these two separate humans, and that conversation needs to evolve. And I don't think anyone has it perfectly. And part of the issue I take with the internet sometimes is some of these people that have 8 nannies and a housekeeper acting like they have all of their, shit together and they have the perfect marriage. And I'm so appreciative of people like you who are willing to say, like, this is hard and you can love your partner through it, but you're not alone if you're like, this is more challenging than I anticipated, or there's challenges that you didn't think necessarily were going to happen that happened. And that's okay.
Yeah. Well, I think too, it's like, I mean, I would say that like my postpartum and stuff like that time period was like as easy, quote unquote, easy as it could have been. Even stuff like that. Like I remember like reflecting in the moment, like let's say my son was 3-ish months old, where like your adrenaline's worn off, but you're still freaking exhausted and like there's no end in sight for a full night's sleep. And like, I remember like thinking to myself back to the, like, I should be able to do this, being like, other people have this so much worse. Like, why does this feel so hard for me? I have all these reasons for it to not be hard for me. So why do I think this is so hard? Like just feeling like I should be like thinking it's easier than it is. And I'm like, no, this still feels freaking hard. So like,
it is.
It's just, I think this like expectation, I don't know, like what hard should look like too is like different for everyone. And like some things about it are harder than others. I don't know. It's just.
I mean, the Suffering Olympics is my worst or my least favorite, thing to watch. And you'll get those people that are like, just be grateful for X and Y and Z. And I got that. My husband got 8 weeks of paternity leave, which was incredible. And if I was struggling, well, just be grateful your husband's. Of course I am, but this is new and this is hard and you're sleep deprived. And just because someone else may have 2 broken legs and a broken arm doesn't mean it won't suck if you break a toe. You know what I mean? Like, why are we trying to compare here and one up each other in this aspect of who has it worse? Things could always be worse, but things could also always be better. The more that we open ourselves up to these conversations, I think the less scared other people are to come forward and say, oh my gosh, me too. I think a lot of women sit within their feelings because they're maybe scared to say, like, I feel a little bad that I feel like this. Or I opened up about the really crazy intrusive thoughts I had after I had my son, and they were pretty terrifying. And I had so many people message me and say, I thought I was broken. Oh my gosh, this happened to me too. And I didn't tell a single soul because I had these crazy invasive thoughts of me throwing my son out the window. And I thought something was wrong with me. I'm like, no, like the slews of messages. And I think people are scared to sometimes come forward with it, with the fear that they shouldn't feel, that they shouldn't think it's hard, or they have it good. They have a supportive partner. They have a family. They have whatever. But it doesn't mean that it's not hard.
It's funny because it's not funny. So this happened 4 years ago. And I would say I think about this once a month. I'm not going to name this person, but it's someone very close in my life who had a beautiful daughter and found out she was pregnant with her second. I was with her when she found out she was pregnant with her second, and she could not stop crying. And I was like, this was before I had kids. And I was like angry. Like, I was like genuinely angry. How dare you be so ungrateful? And like, I think about it so frequently because I'm like, I was such an asshole. Like, I can't believe I like couldn't have seen in her, this person is so close to me in my life who like, I know what, like, why she was feeling the way she was feeling. But like at that time, I just like, I couldn't understand why she wouldn't just purely be grateful to like be pregnant. And like it was on purpose. She was trying. And so I'm like, I just don't get it. Why are you not so grateful? And it's like, then I got pregnant with my second and I had this holy shit moment. Like, I'm like, and I've had a lot of those in the last, how many weeks am I? 30 weeks in the last 30 weeks where I'm like, oh my God, like, am I ready for this? Like, this is really scary. It's just another scary thing. And I just like, this is making me think I need to call her when I like am done here and like apologize to her for doing this to her. But I'm like, I just can't believe that I was so out of touch. But again, it's like, I think you just don't know until you do it. And now I'm like, I totally get it. I get why she was freaking out and like why she needed a moment to pause and freak out. Before she was grateful. But yeah, it's funny. I think like motherhood gives you so many newfound perspectives.
These conversations are so important because maybe someone listening to this, if they do experience someone that bursts into tears when they have a pregnancy that they very much tried for, they will say, just what do you need? I remember, so we went through a pretty grueling infertility journey. And when I found out I was pregnant with my son and we had made it past a certain point, I remember being like, wait, I don't want to do this. My husband's like, what did we just go through this for? And I had a really intense panic moment being like, I don't know if I can do this. I think a lot of people probably have those. And I'm sure with your second, you've had a whole slew of things. So like in preparing for her arrival, have you thought any type of, oh God, oh shit, like what have been some of your feelings around the impending arrival of that sweet baby girl?
Yes, I've had a lot of oh shit moments. I mean, it's funny. I said to someone the other day, to be honest, I think if I had waited a little longer to get pregnant, I would have waited a lot longer to get pregnant again, because I got pregnant right before my son turned 1. And you're in this bliss of like, oh, he's so cute. Still infants. And then they like become a toddler and you're like, holy shit. This is insane. And he has like really big feelings. And I think it's like going to be one of his most amazing superpowers. And I'm working really hard to figure out how to nurture that in him and not stifle it. I didn't really like see that side of him until I was already pregnant. I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? And I joke with my husband, My son was very active in the womb, crazy active. And so is this baby. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we joke all the time, Tim and I do. We're going to have two crazy kids. Everybody says the second one's really chill. She's not chill. I'm telling you, like she's doing gymnastics.
You know.
So yeah, I've had a lot of oh shit moments and everything we talked about before, like wanting to show up for my son. I'm like, okay, so now I want to show up for my son as he endures this like massive transition, which I have a hunch he knows is coming and is like part of the behavior stuff.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Even that, it's like, okay, so now I need to divide myself into like yet another segment because I want them both to have pieces of me. You know, I think about like my breastfeeding journey with Archer was so important to me and it was not without its challenges, but it was so important to me. I was hell bent on doing it and I nursed him for over a year and that was like my holy grail. How am I going to do that with a second? Like I'm going to have a toddler running around. So then you go through the guilt of like, well, do I give my second kid the same thing I gave my first? Oh, and by the way, like I know people who do it, so I should be able to do it. Like
the shoulding yourself to death. Oh,
I know.
I feel like that's what motherhood : shoulding yourself to death, not shoulding, or shitting. Depending on what's happening.
Yeah.
I think that's where we all get caught up. And I have no doubt that you're going to be incredible. And that's interesting that you very well could be sensing some big impending changes. It's kind of insane when you look at how much goes on in a given day and that all of us don't just collapse and our brains don't melt. Although I do find my keys in the refrigerator kind of a lot. I'm not going to lie, but I think that the way that you explained it of like segmenting yourself and how many times can you do that, but still keep all the segments full?
Yeah. And there's always crossover.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing too, is like and I think that that's also a piece of this like flexibility conversation that I like, you had said something earlier that made me think this. You think that with the flexibility, you're just going to be able to like, okay, now I'm a mom. Okay, now 20 minutes later, now I'm a career person. That doesn't work. It's actually like, I think it takes just a little bit more energy sometimes to constantly be flip-flopping.
Yeah.
I find this actually too in like a consulting type role where I have multiple clients. I'm on one call from 2 to 3 for one client, and then I have a call from 3 to 4 for the other client. It's a little bit of like a mind F where you're like
code switching.
Oh my God. And so you do that then between your motherhood brain and your career brain and your wife brain and friend and blah, blah, blah. Before you know it, you're like expending, I don't know, 5-10% more energy just doing this switch. That's a really draining piece of the flexibility too, is just like this. I mean, I think so many moms and women in general are just multitaskers. Oh my gosh, that takes this to like a whole new level because you really are living in like those segments of yourself across all of them. If it's the pie shape, you're like right in the center. You're just like touching all of them at once.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that because my husband has this ability to sit down and have a one-track mind. And that can go back to what you were saying, where sometimes it feels like it's just automatically your responsibility. And I wonder if you experience something similar where it's like you watch him be able to do one thing at a time.
Or to do nothing. Like sometimes, this was before we had kids, but sometimes I would be like, what are you thinking about? And he's like, nothing. I'm like, what do you mean nothing? He's like, no, I'm like literally not thinking about anything. I'm like, huh? Is that possible? I've never known if that's true. Now more than ever, it's, on a Saturday or Sunday, like our son goes down for a nap. And we're like, oh, thank God we can take a nap. We both lay down on the couch. He's out in like 2 seconds. I'm sitting there like making a grocery list in my head.
Yeah.
So like, invoicing my clients. Yeah, that it's the one track mind. It's also like the ability to turn it off, I think.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's all men. I just am speaking from my experience with my husband. Like he is able to shut it down and I am not. Ooh, so you're living in this like whirlwind all day. And then when you're not supposed to be living in it anymore, you're still living in it.
For me personally, I actually get that much more disappointed when I make a mistake. Like the other day, my son fell off the couch. Oh my God, I'm traumatized still. And I haven't forgiven myself for it. And my husband's like, he's 10 months. He's like rambunctious. He's just flailing around. My son just fell off the couch because I'm trying to do too many things at once. I'm a shitty mom, as opposed to my husband's like, it's fine. And then kept living his life. I was like, whoa.
Being a mom is like the highest stakes job I think you ever have. I have decided that I think like the most important thing is listening to my gut.
Yeah.
And, like creating space to listen to my gut is sometimes like just the most critical part. I do try to like inform myself, but there's just so much information out there that sometimes I'm like, I think I just actually have to trust my gut here. Like I'm going to believe that like I'm in this role of a mother for a reason.
And to that specific child, like your children, you are the best mom for your children. And I think we're becoming into I hope, fingers crossed, like a more supportive community within mothers of not being like, well, you need to do this or you need to do that. Remembering that you're the best mother for your children. I would not be able to parent your children because they are yours, and listening to yourself is really important. And I would love to hear your POV too once baby girl comes, if that's easier or harder. If like the second time around, it's a little bit more second nature. Like I'd love to maybe even like reconnect once you have her, just to see how that is. Cause I think we're done. So I need the deets. I need the deets from you.
Well, yeah. If I haven't ripped all my hair out, I'll gladly tell you.
Fantastic. But it was so fantastic to catch up with you. Friends, let us know if you have similar thoughts, feelings, opinions on all of these things. Remember, you're never alone in any of these thoughts. Lucy, thanks for being in the tent, and we'll chat soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Welcome to My Tent podcast. I hope you had as much fun listening as I do recording. I am so happy to have you here, and see you next episode.